Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Album of the Week video. This is episode number 197. Today, I will be raising my glass to what is probably my favorite Saxon album. That is the mighty Power and the Glory. And the reasons why I will be raising my glass, and most of you all too, is that tomorrow this will turn 40 years old. So this week we shall all be raising our glasses to the mighty Saxon's classic 5th album. So let's toast, folks. After original drummer Pete Gill leaving in early 1981 after the release of their iconic Denim and Leather album due to an hand injury, Nigel Glockler would join and pretty much ended up becoming Saxon's permanent drummer, and still is their drummer to this day. They would also be a part of the 1982 Monsters of Rock Festival at Donington Park, United Kingdom, in the UK, making it their second time playing there since the initial first Monsters of Rock Festival in 1980. The 1982 festival featured the lineup of, besides Saxon, Hawkwind, Uriah Heep, Anvil, and Gillan, with Status Quo being the headliner of that night. 1982 also saw the release of their very first live album, titled The Eagle Has Landed Live, which became Nigel Glockler's first recorded performance, for record. From there, it was on to coming up with the follow-up album to 1981's Denim and Leather. So, sometime in 1982, initial production took place at Cayley Studios in Yorkshire, England, with at least 7 songs being demoed. Those, of course, would end up as bonus tracks on the 2009 and then, of course, later subsequent reissues of Power and the Glory. Eventually, they would fly out to the United States, this time to properly record Power and the Glory, basically scrapping some of the demo stuff they had already, recorded and demoed. Pretty much just scrapping all the stuff that they kind of had demoed at Cayley Studios. Here they were landing at Axis Studios in Atlanta, Georgia, with Jeff Glicksman producing, whose past work was with Gary Moore on Corridors of Power, which I covered last year on an episode of Album of the Week. And then, of course, Victims of the Future. And, of course, the Kiss Paul Stanley album from 1978. So he's had a decent enough track record. At least 12 tracks were recorded, with one of these being a re-recording of Susie Hold On, previously on Wheels of Steel. 8 tracks were, of course, chosen, though with the re-recorded version of Susie Hold On having a place in this selected 8 tracks, That means that the other 3 tracks were left off from here, and of course were never released as B-sides. Those were, of course, Make 'Em Rock, which was a more finished version of a track titled Stand Up and Rock, which was previously demoed in 1982 as part of the Cayley Studios sessions. Turn Out the Lights, also previously demoed at Cayley Studios. And then there is Coming to the Rescue, a song that was at the time brand new. But again, it was left off and stayed in the vault. Eventually, these songs would all end up on the Diamonds and Nuggets disc in 2000, which features plenty of unreleased recordings that span out as early as 1978. So, with 8 tracks chosen for both the US and European markets, Power and the Glory was then released on March 21st, 1983. So, these 8 tracks are, of course, beginning with the title track, Redline, Warrior, Nightmare, This Town Rocks, Watching the Sky, Midas Touch, and then finally ending with The Eagle Has Landed. So there it is. There's at least the original main 8 tracks for this album. Now I should be pointing out the differences between the European track listing and the US track listing. Now these days, the European track listing, which is the track listing that I just basically told you, or I've just went through already, is to this day is the definitive track listing of the album. However, back in 1983, when the United States, the track listing was altered. And this is where the re-recorded version of Susie Hold On comes into play. The re-recording of Susie Hold On here would actually replace Midas Touch, which then altered the album's track order as well, with Susie Hold On being placed as track 3 on side A, Warrior then being placed at track 2 on side B, leaving Watching the Sky at track 3 on side B. It is also of note that the South Korean pressings of this album only contains 7 tracks, with the title track being left off entirely, which is crazy because that's what the album is basically been titled after, is the song Power and the Glory. But obviously the reasons why they probably left off the song Power and the Glory off of the South Korean pressings is obviously for censorship reasons. Be it weirdly enough, Warrior, which is again about the Vikings, which also makes references to raping and pillaging, was left on. I guess that means they're okay with violence, but not okay with the subject matter in the song Power and the Glory for some bizarre reason. Again, it's a bizarre fucking country. Let's just put it that way. Their censorship is it's off balance. There you go. So, while Power and the Glory is not that much different from the previous albums, at least writing-wise, but what's different is in the production department. Glicksman gives Saxon a slight glossier sound, but the edge is still present. The performances are even more biting, giving it a much more metallic sheen as compared to the bare-bones approach of the early albums. The band is even beginning to play around with more melodies, even more harmonized vocal sections, but still confined inside their blue-collar working-class metal filter. Just take a listen to songs like the title track and Midas Touch. Both are built around heavy guitar riffs, but are emphasized by more melodic structures. You also have barn burners like Warrior and This Town Rocks. Warrior borders on the same formula that songs like Machine Gun and Heavy Metal Thunder were built on, but comes across more lethal here. Whereas This Town Rocks is more on the boogie side of things, but just like I said about Warrior, it's a lot more metalized. Of course, you have Redline, which is classic Saxon. Then there is Watching the Sky, which is obviously about aliens and their possible existence. Sounds like if Fox Mulder had written this. Even more on the boogie rock side of the spectrum here, but it's a lot more melodic, which actually gives off the direction the band would go with on their next album. And I should also kind of mention that the last parts of the song where it kind of goes in this sort of blues rock kind of pacing and riff stuff kind of reminds me a little bit of that sort of blues rock ending to the song Judgment Day off the self-titled debut album from '79. For some reason, it always kind of reminds me of that. So, and a little bit of the ending parts to see the light shining off of Wheels of Steel. So, yeah. Still, that kind of just keeps the track in line with, just again, classic Saxon. Then there is Nightmare, a sort of semi-power ballad, but again, the seeds were being planted here for the direction they would take on the subsequent 80s albums here. At least this feels a little more genuine though in its execution. Again, it has a nice atmosphere to it. Again, just overall a pretty good ballad that they came up with here. still you're kind of hearing what's going to take place in the writing department, and on coming on the later albums after this. So yeah, speaking of atmosphere though, gotta talk about the song that ends off this classic. That is The Eagle Has Landed. An obvious reference to the title of the live album. This originally started off as a slow, heavy blues jam between Nigel and Graham. The initial recording of this jam, where this song came to be, can be heard on the Diamonds and Nuggets disc from 2000. This song really brings out their influences, from Cream to Zeppelin to Hendrix to Trower, and even a dose of Sabbath and 70s Priest in its approach. Just drenched in atmosphere, kind of prog-ish, sort of leaning back to the style of the band's 1979 debut, but more realized. I just love the fuck out of this track. Obviously, I love the old early blues-drenched rock for the most part. Again, it's just a slow burn, but has an aura to it, like if you're being flown across the night sky kind of vibe to it. Then towards the end, it picks up and ends on a heavy jam note. What a song and what an ending. Yeah, so it's just a fantastic track and one of my biggest highlights off this album. I can't tell you how many times I've spent listening to this album. It's such a great fucking album. It's pretty varied compared to the previous albums. It's pretty much a transitional kind of album, but it packs a heavy punch. And it's all the reasons why I rank this album pretty high on my favorite Saxon albums. Now, because of the direction they were beginning to take here, you think they would expand on this album's style, which they would, but not in the way you would think. After this, they would return a year later with their most watered-down effort yet, in the name of Crusader. More on that on another time. For now, I'll just leave things at this. It's a great album, and this week is a great reason to raise your glasses in celebration of this album turning 40 years old. If you have any comments regarding this album, whether they be positive or negative, you can leave them in the comments section below. But if you've never listened to this album, and again, if you're beginning to get into Saxon and had yet landed on Power and the Glory, I'd say go out and get this. It's still in print, and finding a copy should not be difficult at all. If anything, sites like Amazon and eBay should be mandatory to look at. So with that, this is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you a lot later. Take care, everyone.